So this is Buddha Bit, the graduated path to enlightenment, the great scope of spiritual practice, and we've arrived at the Buddha Bits about Bodhicitta. So last Buddha Bit was, introducing the idea of Bodhicitta and some commentary about it. Today we want to talk a little bit about Bodhicitta in regards to, for example, Shantideva's first chapter of the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, where he talks about the special qualities of Bodhicitta. And I think they're quite important to have them in place, that even if you could memorize them, for example, because they give you there's wisdom behind them, especially if you get the full teachings, and then it gives you this greater stability in being an altruistic individual. Now, remember that bodhicitta, yes, is working for the benefit of all sentient beings, but a lot of that is that I need to work on myself to improve who I am, that I can offer a better relationship to others. So I would like to be of benefit. I'd like to be a better benefit. I'm going to practice. I'm going to have my shamatha, or my quietude, or my mindfulness. I'm going to have my wisdom. I'm going to attend to teachings. I'm going to develop myself. All of that, if you're doing it with the idea of that I'd like to offer a better relationship to others, it's become bodhicitta. Okay. Now, if we come back to Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, he says, for example, if you wish to be, free of the suffering of samsara, you wish to attain the bliss of enlightenment, then there's nothing better than the attitude of bodhicitta. Just meaning is it gives you a really positive context, And one part of that actually is that Buddha was a genius. I didn't mention anywhere in the previous talks about the Four Noble Truths. But Buddha's first teaching was the Noble Truth of Suffering, and the path, this cause of suffering, the cessation, and the path. And so on one side, people sometimes say Buddhism is morbid, but it's not. One is, wake up to your situation that you're living in. Maybe you could improve on that. That's the Noble Truth of Suffering. And then that there is a cause for it, like maybe I'm making bad decisions. And then, okay, there can be freedom from this. And then finally, there's techniques. Okay, so that's one. But on the other side, as for a bodhisattva, if you start to really reflect on the noble truth of suffering in regards to both yourself and with others, you're establishing the foundation of empathy and compassion, real compassion, not just sort of some intellectual one like, oh, I feel sorry for you. No, like, whoa. So studying the noble truth of suffering is a huge foundation for your practice of bodhicitta. Not that you're morbid or anything, but rather that you're starting to appreciate within yourself. I mean, there's the suffering of change, and suffering of pervasiveness. So, I mean, suffering. Okay, the suffering of change is we don't like things to change. They do. When we feel sad, okay, well, then there's the suffering of suffering, which is not only do they change, but I'm miserable about the change. So now I've got the suffering of suffering. And then finally, suffering of pervasiveness. As long as your mind is deluded, you're going to suffer. Okay, so that's pretty smart. But it's smart. Then there's the suffering of birth, the suffering of aging, the suffering of death, the suffering of not meeting what you like to meet, meeting with what you don't want to meet. All of these things. Now, if you can review them and become a little bit familiar with them, first you can see it in yourself. I remember Geshe Nawandarge, and this is back in 1972. There's like 25 or 30 of us Westerners all sitting there attending teachings from Geshe Nawandarge, Sherpa Tupel, the translator, and he said, if you were to experience 1 minute of being 60 or 70, right now, because you're only 20, you'd think you were dying. And we all laugh. Okay, I'm 74. Dargay was so true. Every morning you wake up with pain. There's certain food you can't eat. You have to take all these medications. You're looking at death in the next 5, 10 years, whatever it may be, whoa, it's a whole nother ballpark. Anyway, but we studied Buddhism, so we can say, oh, that's true, Anyway, coming back to the point is that if you're a little bit familiar with that, the Ola point, so there's the three major sufferings, there's the six groups of suffering, then there's the eight groups of suffering. Those are just sort of, outlines to meditate on. Then there's the suffering of the animals, which is something we can actually observe. Suffering of humans, we've got those Olos group. Suffering of gods and things we don't really understand, and suffering of ghosts and hell realm, we don't just have to imagine. But the bottom line is certainly we can really like go, wow, I mean, so for example, let's say you're sitting in your garden, or you're in some park or something, you see the beautiful little birds fly by and you think, oh, how sweet, or look at the beautiful little butterflies, but birds are like, they don't have a home. They're worried about a bigger bird coming along and attacking them. They're looking for food. They don't have any, like if it's cold, they sort of puff up their feathers. If it's hot, that's fine. They have to look for water. Whilst they're looking and getting water, they have to be afraid that they're ready to get eaten. Now, it's not that you look at them with like some negative mindset or like, oh, how horrible. But no, look at them with love and compassion. And again, I mean, whether we put bird feed out or not, I mean, you can do that, but then you don't want to take away the capacity for those animals to sustain themselves, where they become codependent. So, use our intelligence. But the thing is, suddenly you start to go, wow, I mean, when I see the birds, I'll say, oh, Mani Padme Hum. May they have happiness in the cause of happiness. When I see a stray dog on the road, oh, Mani Padme Hum, or Tara, may they meet with somebody that loves them and takes them home and takes care of them, So we can say our mantras with them, or then, like just the thing of, when you see a child crying, it's the suffering of growing up and not having a language and not having capacity to express yourself properly and just having to deal with things. Or then, the suffering of being separated from the things that you like, or the suffering of having to meet the things that you don't like. All it really just expands your horizon of having really honest compassion. Why? Because maybe you've seen it in yourself, and then you have empathy, which is the real basis of having authentic compassion. Now, we don't have to experience everything to have compassion for another person. We don't need to be traumatized or whatever like that. But the thing is, at least we can open our mind in that direction, because this is the basis of our altruism. Anyway, so I actually didn't plan to go in this direction with my Buddha bit, but I guess it's actually a really important point. That as a bodhisattva, if we'd like to be an authentic person, one, get in touch with your own sufferings and deal with them and resolve them. But do it with the idea that, well, if I deal with my own anger, may I be able to help others deal with their anger? So you're doing it for more than yourself. Or if I'm dealing with my attachment, my possessiveness, or whatever, okay, well, may I deal with my possessiveness? May I just be a helpful, wonderful person without having to be needy with strings attached to that? Okay, well then may I do that also to help other people have those sorts of thoughts and feelings. Not that I'm going to lay a trip on them, but if somebody asks, may I be able to offer good advice? And if least nothing else, may I embody that style of life, so that if somebody comes along and says, gee, you seem to manage well with your anger or with your attachments. Why? And you say, well, because I meditate. And then why? What's that? Well, because I'm a Buddhist. So skillful means. Anyway, so there's actually this Buddha bit on bodhicitta, and actually it's hitting the very ground of how bodhicitta would work. Okay, so that's a little short little class.